Unfortunately, it wasn't that long ago. It was a little bit over a year ago that I stood in this spot and I gave a lecture in honor of the shloshim, the 30-day memorial of my father, Alav Shalom. And now is the shloshim, the 30 days from my mother's funeral. It was helpful for me when I thought about some memories of my father, and I shared them with the community last time, so I figured I would do the same thing tonight. So let me just start off by pointing out the obvious, that my father's passing, my mother's passing were pretty much back to back as far as years. The exact dates are 16 Kislev, my father's first yahrzeits, 16 Kislev this year. And then my mother's passing was the 12th of Tevis. So at any rate, when she passed, I was thinking, how many days apart were the actual days, the yahrzeits? It's got to be 20-something days. And then I kind of remembered something vaguely. I wasn't exactly sure about something that the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, said about his parents' yahrzeits. They had something to do with 20 days. I thought it was 26, which is the name of Hashem, the Yud Ke Vav Ke. Yud is 10, and Hey is 5, and Vav is 6, and the Hey again is 5, so that's 26. But I couldn't remember exactly. I texted one of my good sources, Chaim Shalbrook at Lahak, and I said, could you remind me what it was? He knew exactly immediately. He told me, look in the Pesach Davar, Likutei Sichos, Chelek Chav Daled. So I opened up volume 24 of the Likutei Sichos right there. The Rebbe says like this: his father's yahrzeit is Chaf Av, the 20th of Av. His mother's yahrzeit is Vav Tishrei, the 6th of Tishrei. So you have 20, 20th of Av, and 6, the 6th of Tishrei, 20 and 6, 26, Shem Havaya, the name of Hashem. And this is the famous teaching from the Gemara, Ish ve'isha zachu, if a man and a woman, husband and wife, merit, Shechina beineihem, the Shechina, Hashem's presence will be between them, Hashem's presence as represented by the number 26. Okay, so there, the Rebbe's parents' yahrzeits, the actual dates, if you add up the dates, you have the 26. But I was thinking to myself, maybe between their yahrzeits, there's 26 days. A little bit different way of doing the math, but I thought, it's 3 weeks and a few days, maybe it's 26. So I printed out a calendar. This is during Shiva. I printed out a calendar, and it was 27 days. Ruined my vort. I had a great line. I could say something, people during Shiva. I don't know if you know what it's like to be painfully introverted and have to sit Shiva twice in 13 months. You know what happens in Shiva? People come and they try to engage you in conversation. I don't want to have a conversation normally, but especially when I'm grieving. So you have to have something to say. I would have had a great vort to say, but it was 27 days. But then I realized something. One of those 26 days was Lamed Kislev, the 30th day of Kislev. The 30th day of Kislev isn't always a day. It's sort of like Lahavdil, like the 29th of November, it doesn't always exist. 30th day of Kislev, in most years it does, but sometimes there's not a 30th day of Kislev. Sometimes Kislev only has 29 days. The year of the Hayom Yom, the Lubavitcher Rebbe wrote a sefer called Hayom Yom, where there's a thought for the day every day. The year that the Hayom Yom was compiled, there was no Lamed Kislev. And I actually mentioned this at the Shiva, the first days of Shiva. We were sitting in Chicago, which was where my mother was laid to rest, in the same cemetery as my father. And basically all of my family were Chicago Jews going back since before World War I is when they came over. So most of the family's buried there in Chicago. So the Rav who officiated the Levaya was the Rav of the Lubavitcher community there in Rogers Park, Rabbi Hertz. So his wife, Chani, I was telling this to them, and she says, oh, Lamed Kislev? Yeah, Hayom Yom? Yeah, I know that. My birthday's Lamed Kislev, and I don't have a Hayom Yom. I said, very good, that's right. In the year that the Hayom Yom was compiled, there was no Lamed Kislev. So if you go through the whole Hayom Yom, there's a thought for the day every single day of the Jewish year, except one date, Lamed Kislev. There's nothing on the 30th of Kislev. It just doesn't exist. My parents would learn together. both of them learned a lot. My mother would go to classes. They were very into learning, but they also learned together. And they learned together every day. And one of the things that they learned together every day was Hayom Yom. So in the Sefer Hayom Yom, which they learned together every day, there are only 26 days between their yahrzeits, because there is no 30th of Kislev. So there you have the real ish ve'isha zachu, that when a husband and a wife merit, how do they merit? By coming together, learning the Torah of the tzaddik. Then you have Shechina b'neihem, you have the 26. That's how they get the 26. Because I was worried, how can you take something that Rebbe said about his parents and steal that and apply it to your own parents? But the whole vort only works because they were learning the Rebbe's teachings. And that's something that I didn't get to tell them, but I'm sure if I would get to tell them that they would love that, because they loved learning, they loved the Rebbe's teachings, they loved anything that would bring out a connection to the Rebbe. So I'm sharing it with you. I'm hoping that somehow they hear. My parents watched every single thing that I posted. They watched everything. They were my biggest fans. And I don't know how it works up there, but I'm assuming. By the way, my parents were boomers. I'm Gen X. They're boomers. They would ask me questions about a lecture that I posted, but I would be like, "Which lecture is it?" Well, I'm not sure. They would vaguely describe it. I'm like, "Well, where did you see it?" On my phone. I'm like, "No, I don't mean on your phone." I'm like, "What platform?" Which, I don't know. I opened the phone and you come up. It's so nice. My son comes up in my phone. They didn't know if it was YouTube or Spotify. They're real boomers. But Baruch Hashem, the technology, the miracles of modern technology gave them the ability to consume a lot of my content. So I don't know how it works up there, but maybe Elon Musk put Starlink up there or something. I don't know how it works, but I'm sure if they were listening to everything that I posted before, that they're going to continue to listen. It says in Tanya that the neshamas in Gan Eden specifically listen to the Torah that's learned by embodied souls. There's a certain advantage, because there's a lot of Torah up there, but there's a certain advantage of the Torah down here, because we learn it through the filter of our bodies, so we have to struggle more in order to get the clarity, and the souls up there sort of enjoy that. And so I hope they're listening. I hope they appreciate that vort. Okay, I want to speak about my mother specifically. My mother was a speech pathologist and an educator. The story of how she became a speech pathologist really was very deeply personal. She was severely language delayed as a child, and nobody could understand her. And people thought that she was developmentally delayed. Her parents knew that she was intelligent, and she just had a problem articulating. She couldn't create the sounds with her mouth. But she told me that it was very frustrating, very lonely, because she couldn't communicate with anybody. And she said she used to talk to the birds. She would walk down the street in Rogers Park, and she would listen to the birds tweeting and singing. And she said she felt that the birds understood her, and she could speak to them, and they would speak to her, and she would understand what they were saying as well. And I remember her telling me, she said that she was so lonely, but the birds would tweet, and they would say, pretty girl, pretty girl. And she felt less lonely. And eventually she learned how to speak. And when she did learn how to speak, she never stopped. My mother was extremely well-spoken, high energy, articulate, never at a loss for words, very, very, very verbal, like incredible off-the-charts verbal intelligence, zero spatial intelligence. So the fact that I need to use Waze in Cedarhurst, like if I'm driving to CVS, I need Waze, or I will take a half an hour to get home, I blame that on her, because she had zero spatial awareness or kinesthetic awareness. But incredible off-the-charts verbal intelligence, which I got partially. I got part of that. I mean, what I have is not even the full amount, that she just had an incredible ability to speak. And she didn't use fancy words. I mean, she knew fancy words and she would use them when she needed to, but it wasn't like ostentatious, and it was just great communication, just really clear. My father was incredibly quiet, very, very quiet. He didn't speak very much at all. But my mother really, really expressed herself. So it's interesting, she came from that childhood experience of frustration of not being able to share her inner world with anybody else. And then she turned the corner and she was able to speak. And then she just took off and became so eloquent. But then, interestingly, I guess she never said this to me explicitly, but I guess it was understood that because she had empathy for that struggle, when others had that challenge, she devoted her life to speech therapy and helping children, mostly children, also sometimes adults, but helping to give people the gift of speech. And that was something that was very, very important to her. The ability to speak was something that she considered to be essential to someone's humanity. That giving someone the ability to speak was giving them access to their own humanity. One of the things she absolutely loved, was the Jewish concept that humanity is referred to as min ha-medaber, the speaking being. You know, we have the different categories in the world, the different kingdoms. So you have daimim, which literally means silent, but it means inanimate, like rocks and water and stuff like that. Then you have tzameach, that which grows, which means vegetative life. Then you have chai, which means animal life. And then you have humanity, which is called min ha-medaber. Medaber means the speaker. And she loved that concept. You see, the Torah considers what is the characteristic of our humanity, our ability to speak. I mean, animals make sounds too, but to share your inner world, to take abstract thought, to take ideas, to imagine things that have never existed, and then to be able to use words to get somebody else to see that picture in their head as well, that is what's essential to our humanity. When someone doesn't have access to that, and you can give them access to that, you're helping them to reclaim their own humanity. One of the things she loved in Tanya, and I told you my mother and father learned together every day, and I told you one of the things they learned together every day was Hayom Yom. Another thing they learned together every day was chitas, the Chumash Tilim Tanya. And there's a part in Tanya, not in the first volume that more people are familiar with, but in Igeres HaKodesh, which is a little bit more esoteric and difficult subject matter. But in Igeres HaKodesh Siman Hey, in the fifth letter of the Holy Letters, the fourth volume of Tanya. So there's a discussion there about speech, about how speech works spiritually, the metaphysics of speech. And every year when we would come to that, when that would be the daily portion of Tanya, my mother would always reach out to me and say, oh, did you see it? Or I would reach out to her. Yeah, I read your part. I called it her part. Your part of Tanya that you love. Over there, just in brief, it speaks about the fact that, so the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad, he's writing 230 years ago. And he's saying, or 220 years ago, not sure exactly the date of that letter, but he's writing and he's saying that speech is a product of something that is higher than intellect. It's not conscious. He says, we don't have a conscious command to issue a motor command. When you want to form a certain phoneme with your mouth, you want to make a b. You don't tell yourself, vibrate your lips and bounce the lips and make a. You just have the will, the nefesh, the soul has a rotzen, has a desire to produce that phoneme, and then intuitively the hematzois hapeh, the five compartments of speech, the lips, the teeth, the tongue, the palate, the throat, know how to conform to do that, but they don't even consciously know what they're doing. And the Alter Rebbe says, and the nekudos, the vowels, even more so, that there's zero consciousness. He says, you do not think to yourself to close or open your mouth when you make a kometz or a pasach, an or an ah. You just intuitively do it. It just flows naturally because it comes from an origin deep in the soul, what he calls kadmas haseichel. It's not conscious intellect, but it's like pre-conscious intellect. At any rate, she loved that part of Tanya. She loved it. And okay, so as a kid, I had a little bit of an interesting childhood. My father was a psychologist. I spoke about this last year when it was his shloshim. My mother was a speech pathologist. They were both educators, amazing educators. And so the kinds of things I grew up hearing discussed in the house were not typical discussions. So like one of the things I grew up on, I was probably 5, 6, 7 years old tops when to me it was like a normal thing to discuss that of course we know, and don't get triggered by this name, Noam Chomsky, because in my childhood he was not a political pundit, he was a linguist. And linguistic nativism, that was something I knew about as a little kid. That of course, you know, Noam Chomsky was before he was a political pundit, he was originally made his name in linguistics. So his whole theory was on linguistic nativism, which basically nativism means it's inborn, that the capacity for language is innate, that it's part of your humanity. And he had a big machlekes with Skinner, and Skinner said that it's behavioral, and he said, and Chomsky said, no, it's native, it's just the way. Now he doesn't attribute it to a metaphysical source, but he says it's something it's not conscious or it's pre-conscious. At any rate, so a couple of years ago, I actually reached out to Chomsky. I sent him an email and I said, could we talk about Hasidic teachings and linguistic nativism? And he's like, okay, fine. So I actually I never posted it. We were talking about, I said, you know, as a little kid, I knew about Chomsky and Skinner. And I'm like, you know, my mother told me that Tanya says linguistic nativism is a real thing according to Torah. And he's like,
there's a chapter in Tanya. You might be surprised to hear this, but in my family, it's called the Chomsky chapter. And every year, when it's the day that we come to that chapter, usually I'll say to my mother, I say, oh, did you learn the Chomsky chapter? So what does it say over there? It speaks about how language comes from something he calls kadmus hasechel or kadmut hasechel, something that's precognitive. He says the capacity for language is just rooted deeper than cognition. One of his proofs for it is that he says nobody is consciously trying to make the manipulations of their mouth that they're making when they're producing those sounds.
That's quite right. In fact, that even by now we have pretty sophisticated evidence that it's not just the articulations, but even the forming of the thought in language, which we do in language, is not accessible to consciousness.
I said to him, you know, my mother loves the fact that human beings are called min ha-medaber. And I said, and also my mother points out that in Bereshis, when it says that Adam, the first man, is given a living soul, a nefesh chaya, a living soul, the Targum Onkelos says a speaking soul.
When the description of the creation of Adam, and it says that he was given a living soul, a nefesh chaya. So the Onkelos Aramaic translation, which is going back to the 2nd century CE, calls that a ruach mamalala, a speaking spirit. That's an astounding idea.
It is. I didn't know it was an Onkelos, but it finds its way into later Western philosophy. I'd like to see the reference in Onkelos. I'll be pretentious and cite it somewhere.
Okay, hold on a second. With the modern technology we possess, it's not hard at all.
Yeah.
1 second.
I'll have to.
Do you see it now?
Okay, where is
it? Okay, so if you look here.
I see, yeah.
Yeah, so verse.
Yeah, I see
7.
the verse. Yeah, I know the verse. Adam lenefesh chaya.
Nefesh chaya, a living soul. He calls it right there. Let me highlight it.
the ruach mimala.
which
Yeah.
literally means a speaking spirit. And I'll tell you something interesting also.
And after I finished, I called my mother. I said, I just talked to Chomsky, and I told him that it was interesting because it wasn't like she was like shocked by it. She was like, yeah, that's, of course. And it was like sort of like a given that I would be talking to him and he would accept the whole theory and he would corroborate it. It wasn't just in general. That was, my mother was always very, very positive about our accomplishments, but like never shocked by it. It was like a given. Of course we do cool things. Of course. All right. So that's one thing about her speech and about how she valued giving people the power of speech. I want to talk a little bit about also song. We have speech and we have song. So my parents got more involved in Chabad as we got older. But there was one Chabad niggun that we grew up on, even before I could speak. I remember, we used to hear this as little children. My mother sang this to me in the crib. The one song that we had, the Chabad song, we had, later on as we became more involved in Chabad, so we had more and more niggunim. My mother loved niggunim. She was a talented pianist. She never, by the way, felt that she was a very good piano player because her older sister Miriam, is a professional concert pianist. I don't know if she performs anymore, but for a while, she traveled and she performed and she had recordings. So she was a serious pianist. So my mother always felt like, I play piano just, for fun, for amusement. But she was a very, very talented pianist. She used to play the piano. So one of the songs, the big song, I remember, this is from my crib, was Ufaratzta. Ufaratzta, 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 yama vikadma, taveina vinma, ufaratzta. Okay. Why did she have that? Why was that the Chabad nigun that she had? I ever told you this, Mendy? My mother went to a camp in Wisconsin called Olenseng, I think later called Olenseng Ruby Institute, it's a reform camp. The rabbi in residence that summer, back in the 1960s, whenever it was a guy named Zalman Schechter. And by the way, this was another thing. She told me, and I remember this was like a thing, she said, Reb Zalman said that if we sing the Birkat HaMazon, we won't have kavanah, so we have to say it without the tune, because there was a thing that he did. He shut it down like one summer. He was like, we're not concentrating on the words, you're just singing it, you have to just say it without the tune. So that was like one thing. But also, he taught them Ufaratzta. So we had Ufaratzta from Reb Zalman. So there's a whole unrealistic in Gan Eden. So we had Ufaratzta. Remember another song that my mother used to sing, and I never asked her if it had a connection to her friendship with the birds from when she was little. But I remember we would know Friday afternoon she was getting ready for Shabbos, and we used to laugh. I'm gonna be straight with you guys. Me, my brother, my sister, we used to laugh at it. We thought it was corny. Maybe we were a little bit even like cringed out by it. But how did we know my mother was getting ready for Shabbos? Because we would hear her, she had theme music. So she'd start walking around and she was singing. This is how I remember it. I actually looked it up and I couldn't find the song anywhere, so maybe sing it wrong, where she was saying, from bough to bough, from tree to tree, the Sabbath birds sing merrily. Shabbat, 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 Shalom, Shabbat, Shabbat, Shalom. You ever heard this song? Okay, that's how we knew that she was in Shabbos prep mode. Okay. Yeah, let's talk more about other forms of expression. We spoke about speaking, we spoke about singing. Let's talk about writing. So I'm going to say something, not to brag. I'm going to say it to establish something to make the story have context, and that is I'm a professional writer. Professional means I get paid to write. I think I'm considered a pretty good writer. I've been successful with writing, with columns, with books. Okay, why am I saying that? Again, not to brag. Although my mother was my biggest fan, no joke, really my biggest fan. So she probably, if she's hearing this, she would love this for me to brag about myself. She would add more to it. But I'm telling you about my writing skills to give context to what I'm about to tell you. Where did I learn how to write? People ask me that. Did you take a course? Where did you learn how to write? I learned to write from my mother. My mother taught me how to write. How did she teach me how to write? Very, very simple. She did what you're not supposed to do. You're not supposed to coddle your kid. You're not supposed to do their homework for them. You're not supposed to stay up late with them when they have zero executive functioning and they remember the night before that the essay is due, that they have to write it, and they didn't start even though it was assigned a month ago. But she broke all those rules and she did that. What would she do? She would be my stenographer. She would have me dictate and she would type. But here was the thing, I would freeze up and I would have nothing to say. So she would just dictate to herself out loud. Okay, but I could. It's not like I could leave the room. It's not like I could go out front and shoot hoops, you know, on the front driveway. I had to be in the room. If I could think of something to write, so I would dictate and she would type. We had this old Apple II computer, word processor, DOS operating system, and this is in the 80s. And she would type, and if I would have what to say, she would type what I said. If I didn't have anything to say, she would just dictate out loud. And I would listen. And you could say, well, you know, your kid's never going to learn how to write if that's what you do. But here's the thing. She did it for me until finally she did it with me, until finally I did it with her, until finally I did it without her. You understand the progression? First, she did it for me. Then she did it with me. Then, meaning collaboratively. Then I did it with her, meaning I was the main collaborator and she was more of the support. And then finally, I did it by myself. I didn't need to have her there to do it. And so she gave me this gift that today, until this day, anytime I sit and write and I'm able to take my inner world and put it onto the screen or put it onto the paper where other people can read it and have it change the way that they think, my capacity for doing that only comes from the apprenticeship, the patient, tolerant, completely supportive apprenticeship that my mother provided me. And like I said, she was an expert educator. She was a brilliant educator. So I'm sure that that was completely deliberate, that whole process, that method. She never described to me the methodology or broke it down that that's how she did it, but I was there. I know what we did, and I know the progression, and I know how she ultimately brought me to a level of self-sufficiency. And so now I can write without her, but I actually never write without her because my entire ability to write comes from her. So every time I'm writing with her, which is an incredible gift, an incredible closeness. She also gave me the ability to be weird. She didn't give me that ability. I probably was born with that ability. She gave me the ability to not break myself, shame myself, hate myself for being weird. Yeah, I remember one time we went to the mall. I went to North Brick Court, which is the famous mall in the Chicago suburbs. And I get out of the car, and I don't know why, but I was wearing like clown slippers. There was a Purim costume. It was clown slippers. Anyways, I was wearing clown slippers, like multicolor, rainbow color, not a rainbow tallis like Zalman Schechter, but rainbow clown slippers. And I get out of the car, and I was probably 6, 7, maybe 8, and you know, I wasn't a baby, I wasn't a toddler. I was walking by myself in the parking lot. But I was wearing clown slippers. And I remember she looks and she's like, oh, honey, do you want to go put on your normal shoes? And I was like, what normal shoes? This is what I'm wearing today. Oblivious, totally oblivious. And I remember her saying, okay, fine, all right. So let's, very well, so let's go. And I don't know why, but that's something that we discussed a few times throughout the years. You know, she would remember. Yeah, I remember. You know, you do interesting things like, you know, wear the clown slippers to the mall, and And I looked at it, I was like, who's it hurting? You know, well, you want to wear, go ahead, you know, wear the clown slippers. It gave me that attitude, which has been very important for me in life. You're not hurting anyone, you're not doing anything bad. What's so terrible? Well, it looks a little funny. Why? You want to wear clown slippers? Like, what's the so gefährlich wearing clown slippers? And so that I got that from her. And I want to tell you, maybe the clown slippers are not inherently valuable. And maybe, you know, you say, well, you know, should have taught you there's a time and a place for everything. Clown slippers don't belong in the mall. But I want to tell you something. When you start self-censoring and you start shutting yourself down and you start judging yourself, it's very hard to flip a switch and just go back into creative flow state. And if anything, my mother really encouraged me not to stifle myself. Yes, she did give me limits. Yes, she did teach me there are things that are morally wrong. You can't do something that's morally wrong. You can't do anything that's hurtful to others. You can't do anything that God doesn't approve of. But things that just are a little bit weird, we don't have time for that. Just get over it. Just do whatever, do what you want to wear clown slippers, wear clown slippers. Anyways, it has stood me in good stead. My creative output, no question, has been aided by that. And if anybody's ever benefited from anything that I've put out there in the world, just so you know, the only reason that I didn't censor myself and not share it with you is because I said, yeah, clown slippers, you know, whatever it is you want to share. If you're in a creative mode, you share it as long as it's not hurting anyone, not doing any damage. Now, I mentioned to you that we did have limits, moral limits, things that are right, things that are wrong. Okay, so let me tell you a story about morality, how she taught me morality, because that's also very important. I will tell you the story of the first time I lied to my mother, which is also the last time I lied to my mother. You're going to say, wow, how did she manage that? How did she break that? Because it's when kids start lying, sometimes it's very hard to get them away from it. How did she break that habit in you? And I'll tell you the story. Okay, so again, I was probably 5 or 6 years old, around that age. I look back now and I realize that this was incorrect, but I thought I had a pocket knife. I called it a pocket knife. Looking back on it, I realize now that it was like a nail clippers with like maybe some extra like files on it or something. I thought it was a pocket knife and I called it a pocket knife and I thought it was pretty cool. It had this shiny metal sharp stabbing instrument. In my little boy's brain, it was a pocket knife, okay? Anyways, I was very excited about my pocket knife and I would talk about it a lot. When I went to school and I was talking about my pocket knife all the time, and we had this teacher, I do not remember her name, this Israeli lady. She was probably very young. Now, looking back on it, she's probably like, 20 years old, but I don't remember why, but she asked us this question. She said, what would you do if you're walking down the street and a lion jumps out? I don't remember why she asked that. I just remember saying, well, I would stab the lion with my pocket knife. And the other kids in the class are like, get out of here with the pocket knife. Enough with the pocket. You don't have, you're a little kid like us. You don't have any pocket knife. I'm like, I do. And I was so offended that they didn't believe I had a pocket knife. So I go home and I got to get my pocket knife, but I don't remember. Maybe I didn't have it. Maybe I had to get it from my mother, or maybe I knew that if I would just take it to school, she would see me with it. I had to somehow get her to agree for me to bring it to school. That was my obstacle. So I said to my mother, I said, the teacher, I don't remember her name, but I said the teacher, and I referred to her name, said that we need to bring something metal to class. Everyone should bring something metal. So she's like, oh, you should bring your Kiddush cup. I'm like, no, I don't, not the Kiddush cup. No, I had something else in mind. Don't think I can bring the Kiddush cup. I want to bring the pocket knife. She's like, why the pocket knife? I'm like, and I don't know what excuse I made, but it was clear that I was lying. I was a little kid. I wasn't good at lying. I told her this was my first time lying. I didn't have any practice. And she looks at me, she's like, is this true? I'm like, I couldn't even answer her. She says, you're not telling me the truth? When two people communicate, again, this is like she held communication to be sacred. Like, words were holy. All words, speech was holy. Speech was a gift from God. So she says to me, she didn't say any of those things. I'm adding commentary now as an adult, as a 51-year-old. But she says to me, she says, when people talk, their words have to mean something. And when their words don't mean what they're supposed to mean, then they can't talk. That's it. That's all she told me. And it destroyed me. I was so... She didn't punish me. She didn't yell at me. She didn't scold me. She didn't shame me. She didn't tell me I did something bad. She just told me the truth. She said, when you use words, they have to mean something. If they don't, then how can those two people talk to each other anymore? The words don't mean anything. And I felt so terrible that I had caused this rift where I wouldn't be able to communicate with my mother. I said, I'm never doing that again. I will never, ever do that again. And that was it. That cured me. That was the first time I attempted to lie. It was the last. So we definitely had limits. There was right and wrong. There were things that you can do, things that you cannot do, and that was very, very clear. And she did not have to impose, there were no punishments. I'm saying in general, we didn't really get punishments. It just wasn't necessary. There was a sense of morality, of values, and we knew what was right, we knew it was good, and that was expected of us. Tell you more about creativity and as it relates to mental health. I was in my 20s and I was depressed, which I don't know if you've ever been in your 20s, but pretty much the default is you're depressed. I mean, I don't know if that's a universal experience. I think most people, you go through a lot of changes and you're an adult, but you're not an adult and you're trying to figure out life. And I don't know, there's probably neurological reasons also why you become like sort of philosophical and then you start brooding and whatever. It's a tough age. And for me especially, it was a tough age. And I was depressed. And I confided in my mother because my mother was trustworthy. I always trusted her, could always talk to her openly. And I said, I'm, really, really not feeling good. And I don't mean like clinically depressed where, it was like an emergency. It was more like I'm sharing the fact that I'm just not having a good time in life right now, like to state it mildly. And I don't remember her first reaction. I'm sure it was something validating. I'm sure it was something comforting. But one thing she told me, she probably first soothed me, but then, we got to talking, and then she told me something very, very useful. I never forgot it. I've since reminded her about the advice that she gave me. So she quoted Abraham Maslow, and this is in the days long, long before the internet, so it wasn't like you could just go Google quotes when they popped in your head. You remembered from a book that you read, if you remembered basically more or less the words, and that's how you quoted it. So my mother says to me, in the name of Abraham Maslow, creative capacities clamor to be occupied. And it really, really struck me. First of all, it's a great quote, the alliteration, creative capacities clamor to be occupied. She told me that if you have creativity that you're not using, that itself can cause emotional distress. Not that that's the cure for everything, and not that that's the sole cause for why you're feeling like you're feeling, but it's like chicken soup, couldn't hurt. I'm sure it's a group of Jews. I'm assuming everyone knows that joke. Please do not force me to tell the joke that everyone knows the joke, right? Does everyone know the joke? Mendy, everyone knows the joke? Okay. What? Can't talk, you know the joke. Okay, fine. Anyway, couldn't hoit. Fine. So, in other words, she taught me this tool that if you want to be healthy, if you want to feel good, you have to express yourself. And if you have an ability, creative capacities, right? You have the ability to, and you're not using it, then it's going to cause distress. Now, decades later, I saw in a letter of the Lubavitcher Rebbe in the Igros Kodesh, the Rebbe said pretty much exactly the same thing. The Rebbe said to somebody, if you have an ability and you don't use it, you might think that it's just sort of a passive loss. Okay, you could do it, but you didn't do it, so you don't have the gain that you would have had. The Rebbe says it's not true. It's a negative because it'll cause you problems. When you have something in you that could be expressed and you're not expressing it, it actually causes issues. You have to get it out. So that was another thing that she taught me, is like creativity is part of our basic wellness. You have to be expressing yourself. And that's always pushed me, to write, to speak, to express myself, to think. She taught me how to think also, really. My ability to think creatively, analytically, to take something apart in 20 different ways, put it back together, try to come to a conclusion. I learned that. I mean, a lot of that, it wasn't just her, it was a lot, like Shabbos table discussions growing up with my family, typical Jewish Friday nights, really combative, polemic Friday night arguments. But primarily she was my teacher as far as learning how to think creatively. It's Chamisha Asa B'Shvat, Hashgacha Pratis, everything is divinely orchestrated. So Chamisha Asa B'Shvat, or some call it Tu B'Shvat, is the 15th day of the Hebrew month of Shvat, and it's called New Year for Trees. Some people say it's the Jewish Arbor Day, which is a little bit of a, misnomer. Halachically speaking, this is pertinent to me now practically because at the Soulwords house, which my mother lived to be able to see, she actually visited the Soulwords house, and I showed her the back garden, she loved it. I planted some fruit trees. So like the first 3 fruit-bearing years of a tree, you don't eat the fruits. So how do you count a year? It's not calendar years. It actually goes by, the trees have their own calendar. The 15th of Shvat is the turnover, is the new year for trees. So what happens, like today, what's happening with the trees? You go look at the trees, there's nothing happening. They're like completely bare, there's no leaves, there's let alone fruits. So why is that the date? So I remember that my mother, one of the things she used to do a lot of hands-on projects. Like you can ask my kids, like they know that I do a lot of like hands-on learning, like experiments, just random stuff in the kitchen, like vinegar and baking soda, making something froth over, like that kind of stuff. I'm a sucker for that. Anything that's like hands-on experiments, because my mother did that with it. We used to hatch chicken eggs in our house. We had a little incubator. In fact, after she passed away, after the Shiva, I went on Amazon and I have it in my shopping cart, a chicken egg incubator. I just have to figure out the responsible thing to do with the chicks afterwards. But we used to do all types of projects. We used to really, like education was a living thing, would come alive. So at any rate, she used to take us every winter to the maple syrup, I don't know if you call it a maple syrup farm. You know where maple syrup comes from? Maple trees, that's right, yeah. Like the Canadian flag, the big leaf, that's from a thing called a maple tree. So we used to go to Ryerson's forest preserves. It's in the suburbs of Chicago. And we would go there in the winter, and the maple trees would have these spikes in them. And hanging from the spike was like a hollow spike. And hanging from the spike, there was a bucket with like a wire handle that would be hung from the spike. And the sap would drip into the bucket, and then they would turn that into the syrup. And we would always go in the winter. And I remember that we went many times, one time, And I was asking the guy, why do we do this in the winter? And he says, because that's when the sap starts to wake up. That's when the sap starts to run. Like when? He's like, like late January, early February. And I turned to my mother. I was like, Tu B'Shvat. She says, yeah, that's right, New Year for trees. So it's Ashkacha Pratis. Her shloshim is today, is Chamisha Aser B'Shvat. Shloshim, by the way, goes by the day of burial. My mother passed away, like I told you, her yahrzeit was the 12th of Tevis, which was a Thursday. And we wanted to try to get her burial before Shabbos, but it was complicated. She passed away in Pittsburgh, where her and my father lived for the past couple of years, to be near my brother David. But the burial was in Chicago because that's where all the family plots are, so they couldn't, and it was on January 1st also, so everything was closed and they couldn't do all the legal stuff and certificates and things like that. So it had to be after Shabbos, it was Sunday, so it ended up being the 15th of Tevis, meaning it was delayed by a few days, which is interesting because it was delayed by a few days, so her shloshim is on the New Year for trees, and I have this very fond memory with her going and seeing the trees, and also remembering the lesson that we learned from that, which is that you don't wait for the fruits to be grateful. Even when the sap starts to trickle, you start to count your blessings. And if you can appreciate a trickle, the flow will open and things will start to gush. That's a lesson in life. And she taught me that repeatedly. That you don't hold out and wait until the ideal perfect scenario to be grateful. Even when you get tiny, meager little trickles, celebrate that. And when you celebrate that, then it'll bring more good stuff. And that's how she lived. I'll talk a little bit more about her positivity because it was really something absolutely unusual, really, really unusual. We used to really, I'm being really, really straight with you guys. We used to kind of be cynical about my mother's positivity. We felt that she was kind of unrealistic. It was like an inside joke. Like, because my mother would she had such good intentions and she would try to do everything and she would try to be in two places at once. And she was always hurrying and always going from one mitzvah to another. And everything was always good. No one was bad. No one, even strangers. She would, if we couldn't get in somewhere, she would say, oh, there's that guy. I'm going to talk to him. And we were like, he's going to yell at us. No, I'm going to talk to him. And then she would come back. It's okay, we can go in. What do we, he's my friend. Yeah, I made a friend. But that's her attitude. As she liked everyone, she saw the humanity in everyone. She made friends. Some people didn't like her. Anyone who didn't like my mother was really a hardcore misanthrope. They were they had a dark soul because she was so positive. She basically won everybody over. Everyone would end up just liking her. She would expect that everyone's going to be her friend, and they would become her friend. So she was very positive, very full of boundless energy. Anything was possible. Nothing was off limits. We could do anything, really. Me and my brother and sister, our attitude toward life in general is just, you could accomplish anything. Why? Because why not? Of course, you can accomplish anything. And we always had such positive, not just the attitude, but the support. Yeah, of course. I never heard from her any type of dismissive attitude of are you sure? Really? You think you could really do that? Yeah, really? Is that possible? Is that normal? Did someone else tell you that that's something you could do? Never. If you could dream of it, that sounds wonderful, right? So, but we used to laugh at it. Now, we were beneficiaries of it because she was so incredibly positive. We ended up having this absolutely can-do attitude towards everything. But I want to tell you where her positivity was just off the charts. Off the charts. And I didn't speak about it while she was alive. I didn't want to speak about it, but now I can speak about it, is that 12 years ago, she went into the doctor because she had a cough. She thought it was a cold. She was told she has stage 4 lung cancer. The first time she goes in, stage 4, that's it. They told her she has 2 years to live. Tops. With chemo, you have 2 years to live. She was always so positive. Now, she didn't keep it from us. She told us. She gave us the information, but at the same time, it was so full of hope and positivity. And the doctors are wonderful. Of course, the oncologist was her friend. Of course, he was her friend. All the doctors were her friends. And he's going to help me, and it's going to be okay. Now, you could say, you're out of touch. You're in denial. This is not normal. The doctors told you have 2 years. And it wasn't a joke. The lung cancer went to her brain. She had a tumor in her brain that came from the lungs. She had emergency. I remember because my daughter, who's turning 10 in a few weeks, when my daughter was first born, a week after my daughter was born, my youngest daughter, Hannah, I had to tell my wife, I have to fly to Chicago because my mother is in the hospital. She's getting emergency brain surgery. The cancer from the lungs went to her brain. That was 10 years ago. So she was told 12 years ago she has 2 years, tops. She lived 12 years. And not just she lived, she had quality of life. She walked every day. She walked, and she really walked. I couldn't walk with her because she walked too fast and she walked too long. I couldn't do it. I don't like walking. But she would walk miles a day, till the very end. She would walk miles a day. That helped her a lot, by the way, when... Before she moved to Rogers Park, she used to walk 4 miles to shul on Shabbos. She had friends, she had a social life. She would go to shiurim, classes. She loved to learn, like I told you. She would go to classes, she'd go to fabrengens. She would help a lot of people. She didn't stop working, speech therapy and tutoring, and very, very involved in the community. So she had quality. It wasn't just that she survived. She had quality of life. She walked 2 grandchildren to the chuppah. She met and held 3 great-grandchildren. She didn't slow down until a few weeks before she passed away. Every Friday, out of Shabbos, I would video call her. And she would always say, oh, honey, you look so tired. You're so tired. You work so hard. You're so tired. You need to rest. And I would always feel guilty because, yeah, I am tired. But I was thinking, my mother is 27 years older than me. She's got cancer. She's taking chemotherapy. And she was the one telling me, oh, honey, you're so overworked. You need to rest. You look so tired. And she was so full of boundless energy. And literally, she only slowed down a few weeks ago. Really, she only slowed down a few weeks ago. So the last time I was with her in person, I was in the hospital. It was the day of my niece's bas mitzvah in Pittsburgh. And unfortunately, my mother was not able to attend because she was taken to the emergency room and then from there to the ICU when she didn't end up leaving the ICU. So the day of the bas mitzvah, I went to my mother in the ICU and I visited with her. We had a very nice visit. She couldn't speak a lot, but she was 100% lucid and we had a very nice conversation. And we spoke, and I got to tell her again. I told her thousands of times how much I love her and how much I appreciate her and how she's my hero and how much I admire her. And I told her again. But I said to her, we always laughed how positive you are, that it's not realistic. It's, you can't live this way. You got to be normal. You got to be practical. And I said to her, you were right. You were so right. Your positivity was right. It wasn't just rose-colored glasses. I didn't say these words to her because I didn't want to mention the health situation, but through her positivity, her belief that Hashem can do miracles and He will do miracles, and her true joy with every single day, she was able to live vibrant, active, productive years over a decade longer than the longest predictions the doctors gave her. And that was only because of her positivity. So I told her last time I was with her that you were right this whole time and that I want to be more like you. I need to be more like you. If I can learn anything from my mother, it should be that. So she taught me creativity. She taught me self-expression. She taught me self-confidence. She taught me self-love. She taught me get out there and do great things, because why not? There's nothing you can't do. But, probably the biggest thing for me to learn, and I'm still working on it, it's a challenge for me, is the positivity. That everything's great. Everything is beautiful. Everyone is beautiful. she never had an enemy. She never disliked anyone. She always saw the good in everybody, and she saw the good in everything. And it served her well. I'll tell you one more story. I think that's all I want to share. One more story. I shared this story in my parenting course. I realize now, by the way, my whole parenting course really was only possible because of who I was raised by. Because the level that I demand of the parents, I've an online 6-week parenting course. I've had over 2,000 mothers and fathers who I've worked with to help them up their parenting game. And I really demand a lot from them. And I realize the only way I'm able to demand it from them is that I know that it's possible because I saw it, because that's how I was raised. I know it's demanding, but I saw my parents do it. They lived this way. So one of the things that, and I speak a lot about being selfless, and you're not there to get from your children, you're there to give to them and to do whatever you can to support them. How do I know? Because that's how my parents, they didn't ask for anything for themselves. They weren't trying to get nachas even from us. They were just trying to be helpful. But one of the things I share in my parenting course is the art of giving space, because as important as it is to bond with our children, be close, but sometimes close is far and far is close. What I mean by that is sometimes closeness requires backing off, creating space, and letting somebody work something out on their own. And if you can't afford to do that, or you don't feel you can afford to do that, you may not be really as close as you think you are, right? Like having to get in there and control and fix everything is a sign actually that you're not as close as you think you are. So I explained that in my parenting course, and I had forgotten that I told a story. One of the alumni of the course, actually one of the mothers, reminded me after my mother's Shiva, she reminded me of this story, and I was grateful that I'd forgotten that I had told the story, so I was grateful that she reminded me. Bottom line is like this. I was 3 years old. I know I was 3 because I remember the house that we were in. I remember we had just moved there. I remember the green shag carpet, which was very fashionable in the 1970s. I remember standing on the carpet. I remember the spot where I was standing. I remember looking out the back window, the sliding glass door to the porch, looking out into the backyard, just staring off into the distance and shaking with rage. Now, why was I shaking with rage? I don't know. It could have been anything. I was a very deep kid, prone to like deep thinking, and it could have been something philosophical that I was upset about, or really it could have been something really, really trivial, like something sensorial. It could have been like something literally rubbed me the wrong way. And just so you understand, my mother in the 1970s cut the tags out of my shirts, because if she didn't, I would fall on the ground and I would weep, because it was torture for me. Okay. So by the way, a lot of people say, "Oh, how are you so like empathetic towards sensitive kids?" Well, I'm not empathetic. I'm a sensitive kid. I know what that is. So my mother would cut the tags out of my shirt, just so you understand the level of involvement and care, like the concierge service that I was getting. She was cutting the tags out of my shirt. Okay, now they have tagless shirts, but this is in the 70s. So I just want you to understand how closely involved she was, how much she took care of me, so that you get the context here. I'm standing on the carpet. I'm looking out the back window to the backyard. I'm shaking with rage. What set me off? I don't remember. Could have been anything, but I was so angry I was shaking. I remember vividly. She comes over. She notices. She comes over to me. She says, "Sweetie, can I do something for you?" I remembered vividly. She was in the kitchen. She came over to the door between the kitchen and the dining room. She said, "Sweetie, can I do anything for you?" And I don't know why I said this. I remember saying it. I was 3 years old. I said, "No, there's nothing you can do for me right now. This is between me and Hashem." Now, I'm not telling you this because I'm trying to tell you that I was this like deep kid, because personally, I think it's cringeworthy. I think it's weird that why is a 3-year-old talking about Hashem? This is not about me. This is about my mother. I promise you that any mother, even one who was not as loving as my mother, would hear those words and immediately reflexively say, I have to save this kid, I have to do something, I have to comfort him, I have to get in there and do something. And to her credit, she heard what I said. She heard what this 3-year-old boy said. Nothing you can do for me. This is between me and Hashem. And she nodded and she turned around and she left the room, which was the biggest thing that she could have done for me. That she respected my space. She respected my words. She gave me space. And I'm telling you, she cut the tags on my shirt so that you understand. It wasn't like she gave me space because she was the type of person who always gave me space because she didn't want to be bothered with. Some people don't want to be bothered by their own children, so they're always giving their kids space. That's the default. Like they don't even raise their own kids. They hire someone to raise their kids. They don't want to be around their kids. My mother was constantly taking care of us, but when she heard me say, "What I need right now is space," this is between me and Hashem. It must have taken superhuman strength on her part. But she gave me that space. She honored that. She backed off. So that's just something I want to share with everybody, and I want to suggest to you in your parenting and in your other relationships, sometimes what's dysfunctional is not what you're doing, but what you're failing to not do. Meaning sometimes less is more. Or like they say, don't just do something, sit there. Sometimes you think that you need to do something, you really need to not do something. You need to stop doing something. You need to give space. And it's really, there's the chesed, which is the kindness, and there's the gvura, which is the self-containment. Self-containment is very, very difficult. You have to really love somebody to practice self-containment. So I'm telling you that as a tool that you could use. I'm also telling myself that, because like I told you, whenever I write, I'm with my mother because she gave me the ability to write. So really, I'm not doing it without her. By doing it without her, I'm doing it with her because I only write because she taught me how to write. And it's just not just writing. I'm standing up here, I'm speaking, I'm expressing myself because she taught me how to express myself. She taught me the sanctity of expressing yourself. So really, I'm doing that with her as well. And what I'm saying is that when you give somebody tools and you give them their own humanity, their own dignity, their own self-respect, to be able to go out and do things on their own, when you give that as a gift, that's the ultimate closeness. So now, what's happened? We're in 2 different worlds. I'm still here in this world called Olam Hazeh, the physical world, the embodiment plane. She's in the Olam HaEmes, the true world. So we're in 2 different planes of reality right now. But in some ways, I feel closer to her now than ever before because the distance itself proves the closeness, that she can be in another world, and yet everything that I'm doing, I'm only doing it because she gave me the tools to be able to do it. So the ultimate space, it's a vote of confidence that I guess, for a parent to be able to say, I promise you, she hung on for a long time. She hung on. She didn't just hang on for her husband. I know that was part of it, and that's why after my father passed away, I sensed that it wouldn't be that much longer because I knew about her diagnosis. I knew her health condition. She also hung on for her children. And I promise you that it was hard for her to leave this world while her children were still growing up. Laugh, this guy with a white beard is still growing up. Yes, I am. I was always my mother's baby. I never stopped being her baby. I know that I was still her baby even when she left. But for a mother to be able to leave this world and leave her babies is an incredible gift to be able to say, Kendall, I gave you everything you need. I gave you the tools. I gave you the self-confidence. You know how to do this. You've got this. That's an incredible gift. So I'm not telling you this as praise to my mother. She doesn't need the praise. I'm telling you because Shlomo Melech, King Solomon, the wisest of all men, said, that when someone passes away, the living should take it to heart. They should learn a lesson. Maybe we can all be inspired a little bit in our parenting and in our other relationships to empower other people so that they can do great things and that they can do great things even without us. That was what she did. She didn't just do it for her children, of course, for her children primarily and most of all, but she did this for so many countless people. At the Shiva, there were so many people who told stories. Your mother empowered me. Your mother encouraged me to go back to school. Your mother encouraged me to start a new profession. There were so many people that had the same story. She made me who I am. It wasn't just me. Obviously, I'm her son. I say she made me who I am. But there's so many people who had that same story. She made me who I am. She gave me the power. She gave me the confidence. She showed me that I had it in me. So if there could be any tribute, be a fitting tribute to the neshama of Rivkah bas Avraham, this would be a fitting tribute. Empower others, believe in others, see the good in others, see the godliness in others, help them to discover it and tap into it and express it. And it should be a schus for her neshama. Okay, all right, thank you.